as you mentioned, I'm at Morningstar now. Before that, I was chief engineer at an education tech startup called GetSet. And before that, I was a Java developer at Carfax in Columbia, Missouri, the vehicle history company. And I'm in Chicago now. That's where Morningstar is. Or at least that's the office I'm at. We've got a long journey today, so I'll move as quickly as I can. We're going to revisit the age-old topic of technical debt. I'm going to introduce a way that gamification can be used to help fight it, and talk about a success that we had at Carfax, another example of applying some of these concepts at Morningstar, and then on open source offering that we're releasing to see if we're able to get some shared community tooling around this. And so recall what Martin Fowler said: software systems are prone to the buildup of cruft, deficiencies in internal quality that make it harder than it would ideally be to modify and extend the system further. Technical debt is a metaphor coined by Ward Cunningham that frames how to think about dealing with this cruft, thinking of it like financial debt. The extra effort that it takes to add new features is the interest paid on the debt. Okay, great. Very true, little wordy. Alternatively, kill the zombies. They're gonna eat our brains. So obviously that's more fun of a way to think about it. Which would you rather do? Would you rather pay bills, which is what the technical debt metaphor evokes, or would you rather play video games? This is not a decision that we're going to need to send to a recount. So the intellectual argument about tech debt is already won. If it's not, revisit it, and it should be though. But what we need is to change behavior. What you know is not the same as what you do. And if there's a tech migration that involves hundreds to thousands of menial tasks, there are things that you can do to engage with people in a way that's gonna motivate them and not make this such a thankless and always neglected task. So this is where gamification could come in as one of the tools in your toolbox here. Gamification is applying game design elements to a non-game context. There's a notion that gamification is simply points and leaderboards. Sometimes it is those things, but there's a lot more to what makes a game fun than that there are points in it. Points are part of it. This is a very subtle and powerful concept, and I'm not going to go over all of what's on this slide here, but this is something called the Octalysis Gamification Framework, which I think is a really interesting resource, where they've identified 8 core drives behind engagement in a game, and meaning, accomplishment, empowerment, ownership, social influence, unpredictability, like lots of these different psychological factors that are at work, making you want to continue playing a game. And indeed, he identifies the top 3 as white hat drives and the bottom 3 as black hat drives. And the bottom ones are what make it addictive. But if you have too much of the black hat and not enough of the white hat drives, then ultimately you're still having a negative experience, and people won't stay in the long term, and they won't feel good about it. And so this is very subtle and powerful concept. Yukai Chow, who came up with the Octalysis framework, said the gaming industry was the first to master human-focused design. We are now learning from games, and that's why we call it gamification. So this is really a deeper truth that incidentally games have discovered. So bringing this back to my personal history, at Carfax circa 2010, I was on a small team working on a very large technical migration effort that went on for about 18 months, impacting most of the code bases in the company, replacing some of our core APIs. But if you were around at the time, you may recall that you didn't generally have organizational code search at that time. That wasn't a very common thing, and we certainly didn't have it. We had various CVS repos and other sources of truth that there was really no organized way to search to know what was going on. And that became just a complete blocker for us having to modify all these different teams' code. And so I carried this effort on, implemented a code search tool using Elasticsearch to regularly sync these code repos so we could search it, just like you can now. If your organization uses GitHub or Bitbucket, you have that search page. We didn't, so we made it, and we couldn't function this migration initiative without it. So from there, we started making kill lists. Well, these are the things that we're retiring, and we need to know that they're gone before we can proceed. So we would create these search terms that would tell us everywhere that they were referenced, and we could track, from the source of truth, from version control, our progress retiring them. Now, a couple years later, the code search tool had been adopted by the rest of the development teams, because it turns out that that's a really essential thing to have. And then a broader effort for technical debt was introduced by Mike Finney and others, built on this, that brought real gamification into this. And the code references we were trying to retire for varying reasons were called zombies. The people who fought them were called zombie hunters. There was a whole kind of mythology ecosystem around it. And ultimately, and that you can see in the corner was the logo that they used. Ultimately, this ran 3 years until we simply ran out of zombies to retire. We may not have ran out of technical debt entirely, but we ran out of technical debt that could be modeled in that particular way. It was that effective. And many of these things, years and years and years, we had wanted to get rid of, but there just wasn't the organizing force to make the hundreds of tiny changes and get them out before we had these little encouragements. Now, I don't need to go into this in too much detail here, but Mike Finney had studied the Octalysis framework and actually incorporated many of the different core drives in various ways. And what I think was the most creative element was that there was a narrative. When you killed a zombie, when you achieved some benchmark of retirement, you got an email that had part of a storyline, narrative that Sean, who we worked with, who now is a published fiction author, had written about the zombies you were hunting and your struggles with them. And when you killed a zombie of another type of thing that we were trying to retire, it'll unlock part of a different story. And those stories would interleave. So this would, for certain kinds of people, that kept them, engaged. It gives you some surprise. There's a lot more going on than just like counting points. And similarly, this, was integrated into, the corporate rituals and department meetings. We would recognize people who had, racked up some points this week, and became this positive feedback loop. So the important thing here is these were goals we already had. I don't think you're going to drop gamification on something that people don't already think is a good idea. But if there are behavior changes that you generally want to achieve, this can definitely push you in the right direction. This, however, as I mentioned, it was rather elaborate. And if you want to apply something like this, that evolved over time. It might be a little intimidating, but I've got an example for you from last year that actually is very approachable, I think, and could give you some more ideas. So at Morningstar last year, one of the teams that I work with, I'm an SRE, I work across one of the dev teams was saying that they were commonly blocked waiting on each other to review their pull requests. So that was a recurring problem that this team had. And I recognized that, well, that's something you can measure mean time to resolve on, MTTR, which is a common metric in SRE, usually used for incidents, right? Like prod incidents. But it's just another thing that gets resolved. You can measure how long it takes you. And sure enough, it was taking a long time. We knew that. But what's the behavior we want? We want to encourage people to be proactive and review it before they've had to remind each other several times. So what can you do? Well, this is a fairly naive but effective example of gamification, where you can just say, okay, who did that the most this week? Who reviewed the most PRs? And no formal reward behind it, but just like post them some encouragement in the team chat every week. So the top 5 got recognized every week, and the measured mean time to resolve is well reported. And it was just sort of a regular reminder that the team would see. Here is one such message. So this is an actual one, but I've redacted the last names. And every Monday, an automated Jenkins job just runs this script that gets the last week of pull request data and says who has done the most reviewing and what the mean time to resolve was. As you can see, and I didn't tell you this, but this was introduced close to a year ago at this point. So this is like 9 months into the implementation. People are still engaging with this. And you've even got like a comment thread. And I swear I didn't make this up. This is organic conversation where they are talking about, oh, someone got knocked out of the number 1 spot because Isaac, who's actually a junior dev, is just consistently number 1. And when he's knocked into 2 or 3, that's a point of discussion. And so this is, just become this little fun thing that also has produced some results, namely that the pull request resolve time, which we measure now, is down by 25%. It was immediately upon us doing that. We pretty quickly got there. And then for the last year, it's held. So that's not bad for an afternoon's work. It was very simple to do this, actually. It's a 100-line node script. As of today, it's on GitHub. You can take a look at it if you want. If you use Bitbucket server and MS Teams for your chat, then you might be able to use it right away. Or you can write something very similar to this relatively easily. So as a more elaborate follow-up, I'm actually looking to create a company agnostic version of the Zombie Technology Elimination Project. And I've got something close to releasable that you can at least play with right now, but I'm going to need some help for, what different setups do people have who are interested in working on this, and what kinds of search terms do they need to model? How do they want to see the output of this? But I've got the engine behind this about ready. So I'm ready to take on some experimenters, and maybe we can produce some community shared tooling around this. Or if only the ideas get out and we need to customize them individually for every case, that's fine too. But I would love to hear from anyone who's looking to try and implement some of these things. So I've got some references here. When the slides are published on the event page, you'll be able to come back to them. But the GitHub org is Craft versus Cruft. There's a blog from 2013 telling more about the original ZTEP project by Mike Finney, who designed it using, as I mentioned, the Octalysis Gamification Framework. And there's an article by Martin Fowler if you'd like to get some more arguments on why it's valuable to focus on maintenance in a really first-class way. Other than that, and that's as you saw, Elasticsearch was a very valuable and versatile tool. in building some of these, but I'll get more into the technical details of how that was implemented if it comes onto the questions. So I think I'll go to questions right now. And thanks everyone for coming in. Here's where you can follow me on social media.
Thanks, Ray. So I guess I'm not quite following how this all works, I guess. So it seems like you're pulling copies of the source code into Elastic, and then there's some type of search terms, right? But then is there like a front end that you're using to so people can see kind of the progress as they go through and eliminate technical debt?
Yeah, so in the ZTEP app we built at Carfax, yeah, there was that code search portion that regularly pulled the code repos into an Elasticsearch repo, and then we could search them. And there was also this page that showed zombie hunters and their progress, but then also a notification element. So even if you weren't like going to the page, you'd still hear about it. But in the original architecture, so this is where there's a then answer and then there's a now answer. In the original architecture, they simply counted the results at a given time, and then someone would self-report that they had retired some, and then they would check it again and verify it, and then they would, update the current count. But in the new version I've built, it actually is able to parse commit logs, and you'll see based on a diff, a positive or a negative diff, if a term you're trying to retire is getting added to or removed.
Okay, and then where does Elastic come in that? Like if you're comparing, are you like pulling the logs, the commit logs into Elastic, or are you, is that, the diff, where are you running the diff outside of Elastic, or what's going on? Like, I guess, how is it working?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's several possible architectures here, but the one that I've got working now is like on command. You run a regular job, presumably, that does this. You get the current state of the repo into indexed into Elastic so that you can determine the current count of everything, and let people explore if they need to do that. But to get the diffs, you're also indexing the diffs that are associated with every commit. So you're not actually diffing from what's in Elasticsearch. You're indexing the diffs as their own item. So in the object, in the model, there's a file, a source code file, as one type of Elasticsearch document, but then a delta, like the change that a commit has done, is another type of document that gets indexed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got an element on it that's the added lines and removed lines. So if you were looking at a diff, that the ones that have plus at the beginning would be in the added lines area in that doc, and the ones with if that makes sense. And so then by making a search, you can fetch back, okay, what are the commits that have negative activity for this search term?
Right, and then the search term is the thing that you're trying to retire.
Yes.
Okay. I guess how, kind of going back to how do you like designate something as a zombie? How do you say this is the search term I'm trying to get rid of?
That's a decision your team makes. So this is where I think approaches like this have an advantage versus tools like Sonar that just apply standard code metrics. So you can say like, yeah, sure, we want low cyclomatic complexity and we want test coverage, and those things are good. But there are also things like, well, say your team is moving from Mongo to Postgres, and you've got some API that supports the database you're retiring and one that's the one you're moving to. Well, Sonar doesn't really know or care what your team's specific technical goals are. They don't know what are the things you're deprecating. That's something that the team makes the decision on, and then you would update the configuration of this app to know that that's what you're looking for.
Got it. Okay.
So I just saw, oh, sorry, Tom.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's all my questions. Thank you for answering those, Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
I just saw another question from Rich in the Q&A, which says, please tell us more about what we need in Elastic to make this work.
So there's a couple of things that I found to be helpful here. I did end up writing a custom analyzer so that it would parse source code in the way that I expected. Because by default, there are analyzers that work pretty well with English text, but that doesn't always behave the same way that you would expect code to. Like, for instance, underscores. Well, we consider usually in code an underscore is a part of a name, and one keyword might have underscores within it, but then a lot of the stock analyzers would break up the words. So, and I'm happy to share the analyzer I happen to use, because it was hardly any work once I figured out what's going on. It's just a very short piece of configuration. But that's something where out of the box, it wasn't doing the right thing already. Another edge case was when you're searching and getting like result counts back, you're going to get the document count. And that's not what I want to measure in terms of the zombie count. And maybe it depends on what you want. But let's say that a source file references something I'm trying to get rid of. Like, let's say it's in C#, and I'm trying to get rid of array list in favor of list, which is true right now for me. And one file has array list in it 20 times. Well, by default, Elasticsearch is just going to give me one row back, and it doesn't really measure that any differently than file with just one. And similarly, a diff that removes 10 of them from one file gets counted just the same as if it removes one. So I didn't find a way to deal with this on the Elasticsearch side, but I just adapted it by processing the results afterward. So those are some of the things that that I did in order to get Elasticsearch to accommodate this use case. Does that help at all? Any other things you're wondering about?
He says, yes, thanks.
Sure, and feel free to contact me later. My information's here.
I guess one more quick one for me. Did you use anything within Cabana? Either dashboards or alerting or watchers firing from Cabana?
I've used Cabana mostly as a diagnostic tool when developing this kind of thing. just to be able to poke in and see, okay, are my source files being indexed the way that I think? I haven't used it in really advanced ways, but for a lot of the time I was doing more work with this, Cabana really, what didn't exist in the form it does today. So I'm probably underutilizing it. I know it's got a lot of really, really interesting. Like that could be, where you'd go to see, the zombie hunter scores, for example, could be a Cabana dashboard. Maybe I haven't played with that yet.
Right.
Cool. Does anybody else have any other questions for Ray at this time?
No, that's it for me.
Great. Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming on today and chatting with all of us.